perhaps we should back up a little bit and just refer to some of the terms that you have used, entity, spirit. How do you conceive of a spirit or an entity being able to do this, to in effect exist in three-dimensional space and time like that, to jump from one body to another?
Well, let me just say this. First of all, I'm talking about a person who has lived and died. I'm not talking about some kind of entity that is of a different dimension, for instance, a demonic or satanic entity. I'm not involved with that at all. There's no way that I can deal with that or can help someone with that problem. So these are people like a grandparent or a stranger, somebody who has lived and died, just regular folk. And for some reason, their personality, or in some way their personality, continues exactly as they were at the moment of their death, as long as they're earthbound. The usual progression is for them, of course, to go into the light, and we can talk about that if you wish. But they don't do this. They stay earthbound for a multitude of reasons. And they hover around very much as they were, exactly as they were before, but lacking the physical body. Because you see, you know that we are spirits living in a physical vehicle, a body, and that is not who we are. So when the body dies, it's just like an old overcoat, and we continue to exist. And hopefully we go up into the light and into the spirit world, where we drop away all the concerns and problems and depressions or whatever. But if the person remains earthbound, in other words, I feel it's in the physical plane. Some people call it the lower astral plane, but I see it as really the physical plane. Then they are there as an invisible spirit.
I mean, in other words, these, to your way of thinking, these entities or spirits are like some sort of energy matrix.
Yes. They do not have a body or a very well-organized body of their own at that point.
You might think of it like a holographic standing wave or something.
Right. Well, actually, they're sometimes seen as ghosts. This is really what we're talking about, what ghosts, with a common word.
Well, I realize you don't pretend to be some kind of a scientist who can give us a theoretical explanation. You're describing this as a clinical psychologist.
That's right. And I haven't done research into this, and I am really, the theoretical part of it doesn't interest me. It interests me, but I don't feel like the great expert in that area. I do know, I feel, what to do when a person has this problem. That's my area of expertise. And how it all happens is not all that clear to me. But my feeling is that they remain in the physical world as invisible spirits, bringing with them all the pain and suffering or whatever they experience at the moment of their death. And they remain for many reasons. They remain because of their addictions to substances, for instance, food, chocolate, coffee even, drugs of all kinds, alcohol, cocaine, heroin. They are so determined, nicotine of course, they're so determined to continue that habit that they would rather not experience. They don't even know about the light because they're so focused on getting their next cigarette or their next fix or whatever. So they remain for that reason. They sometimes remain, I think usually they remain because they're totally confused and they don't realize that they are no longer alive in their own body. They feel alive. They're still thinking, they're still seeing, they're still smelling perhaps. And so they assume that they are still in their body. And they don't want to look down and face it, there's not much there, or they don't want to face that corpse over there. And so they run over to their family or the doctors and nurses and they try to get help, only to find that their hand goes through them or that nobody's paying the least bit of attention. And this is very, very confusing to them and very frightening and at times extremely frustrating.
So to jump around just a moment, you've used the term the light several times. Let's talk about that end of the phenomenon.
Well, it appears that the normal progression is that when somebody dies, that their spirit lifts up away from the physical body, and they have a wonderful sense of relief as they're heading toward this light that is described almost universally by my patients doing regressions to a former death experience, by people who have had clinical deaths and been revived and so forth. This is almost universally seen as a brilliant white light, blinding but not hurting the eyes, in which when they get into this light, they feel very loved and accepted, exactly as they are. If they were depressed, that drops away. If they were in physical pain, it drops away. If they were hungry, it drops away. They're just feeling wonderful in every way. And then from that, I think that's sort of like the entry into the spirit world. There are usually lots of loved ones there. If somebody whom they love died before they they did, then that person is there to greet them, if not even before, to help them to get into the light. So it seems to be a universally experienced situation. Even when people have not read about the light, they say, I see a little pinpoint of light, it's getting bigger and so forth, and now I feel wonderful.
Well, I know it's described classically in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and
Yes.
there is a sense in that book that if one can stay focused on the light and move into it at the point of death without being distracted by the many distractions that
Yes.
one would find, then one could escape from the wheel of life and the wheel of rebirth and enter into the realm of a pure Buddha or Bodhisattva. But otherwise, there will be temptations drawing one into various rebirths. And I suppose the very first temptation might be for the earthbound types that you've described, who are so involved in their own attachments and addictions that they may never even notice the light to begin with.
They usually don't notice the light. Sometimes they're afraid of the light if they have seen it, because they're afraid of going to hell. This is a big fear. This is another reason why people stay. If they've been raised with this concept and they believe this concept, then they're terrified because they did something while they were alive that will catapult them straight into hell. So they would much rather cling to what they consider a safe harbor. And so part of the depossession process is to undo that belief, or to try to convince them that they do not have to be concerned about hell.
So in your work, you find a high percentage of the people who come to see you who seem to be possessed. And I want to ask you, do you think it's because a high percentage of people in the population are that way, or is it because you recognize it more than others, or is it perhaps just part of the symbolic system within which you work?
I really think that it is just generally in the population in general. I think that most people in their lives have been possessed at one time or another. So I'm beginning to now think that it's a sort of 100%. This doesn't mean that 100% of the time one is possessed, but it means that I don't think anybody escapes from this, because there are literally thousands and thousands of opportunities.